Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I am super excited to share with all of you a review of 3 NATASHA DENONA mini palettes. So recently NATASHA DENONA had a big sale on her website on minis, and so I scooped up a bunch of her palettes. So I got the mini nude, this was like 30% off, the mini retro 40% off, and the mini gold, which was 50% off. So I was really excited to pick these up because I've been hearing amazing reviews about these minis for the longest time. I feel like for a lot of folks, the minis are kind of where they start with NATASHA DENONA, since these are pretty affordable considering they're only $27. I mean, of course, they're pretty small and the packaging isn't super luxe, but considering it's NATASHA DENONA, these are generally a really great way to get started. For me, ironically, I actually don't have that many mini palettes. I have the mini Love Story, but other than that, I've mostly collected her midi-size palettes and her bigger palettes. And so I was really intrigued to try these out to see how the quality compares with her normal eyeshadows, and also just to try out these color stories. So if you're interested in hearing my review of these palettes, then just stick around. So today won't be a first impressions because I actually put all of these on my eyes yesterday. I got them in the mail kind of late, and so I didn't really want to film a video, but I was super excited to try them out. But today is going to be my first time doing a complete look for each of them. So I'm going to put one on each eye and then take that off and then do one cohesive look with the third one. And I'm going to do this kind of in the reverse order of how much I like them. Based on that first impressions, putting them on my lids, I would say that I liked the mini gold the best, followed by retro, followed by nude. And so let's start out first with going in with mini nude. So this is what the color story looks like. Honestly, this one I actually was not originally planning on picking up, but I needed more palettes to get free shipping, and so that's why I added this to cart. So let's swatch these shades. First we have Bronzage, which is in her metallic formula. This is a really pretty warm bronze tone. Then we have Coin with QU. I assume it's pronounced coin. So this is a nice matte shade. This is in her creamy matte formula. In general, this palette is a little bit on the warm side, which is why I wasn't originally planning on picking it up. Then we have Lumino. This is also a metallic. This is a light champagne shade. And then Sienna is a dual chrome shade, so very exciting. I would say it doesn't have a super prominent flip to it, but it's definitely higher shine than the other metallic shades. And then finally we have Soil, which is also creamy matte. One thing I will say is that at least all of the minis I have just the creamy matte formula and not the cream to powder formula. So if you guys aren't a fan of her cream to powder, you don't have to worry about that with these minis. So here is a close-up of the swatches, and I actually really do like that dual chromatic shade. Again, it's a little bit hard for me to say that it's a full flip, but it's definitely very, very high shine. Really, really beautiful. So I brought you guys closer so we can go ahead and start this look with the lighter matte shade. There are only 2 mattes in this palette, and so at least if you do your eyeshadow the same way I do, there's only going to be kind of one way to start out a look. But I'm just going to use this Rephr number 27 brush to sweep this all over my crease area. The shade definitely has a bit of a yellowy undertone to it. I also picked up this palette because I thought it would be really great for travel. This is kind of a really good everyday color story. And then with my Wayne Goss number 19 brush, I'm going into this deeper shade and just packing this on the outer portion of the lid. And at least yesterday when I tried all of these shadows, and yes, I did put all 15 on my eyes yesterday, it seems like the quality is really good in these minis. I have heard that her quality for her minis can be a little bit mixed. Like I think Mini Xenon, for example, is not supposed to have the best quality. But part of why I picked these 3 is that I've only heard good reviews about these 3 in terms of quality. So hopefully that pans out with my experience today as well. But that was really easy to blend in. And so now I definitely want to put this dual chrome all over my eyes. So let's put this on. Ooh, very pretty and very creamy. Definitely a fan of this shade. So the one limitation, of course, with these palettes is you're not going to get a bunch of different looks, of course. And that's part of why up until now I've mostly focused on collecting her bigger palettes. But the look you get is really nice. And then with my reference number 21, I'm going to go into this shade and put it on the inner thirds. This one's definitely more muted, so if you wanted to do more of like a less shimmery look, you could just put this all over the lids. Definitely still very pretty. Also use this just to refine the edges a bit. Go back in with a little bit more of that deep matte in the outer corner. And then with my trusty Sonia G Mini Booster, I'm going into that champagne shade in the inner corner. Ooh. Alrighty, so there we go. That's the very, very quick and simple eye look. So now I'm going to quickly replicate that on the lower lash line by first going into the lighter matte shade, a little bit of the deeper shade in the outer corner. Then with my Sonia G Builder, I'm going into the shimmers. First, the dual chromatic one in the center, and the other coppery shimmer in the inner corner. So here we have our first eye look done. So I went off camera to put on some eyeliner, and this is the completed mini nude look. What do you guys think? That was really easy to put together, and I really enjoy all these shades. It's definitely a little bit more warm tone than what I typically go for nowadays, but I think it's still really pretty. And definitely the quality was very impeccable with all of the shades, especially the metallics are so creamy, this one in particular, and that's pretty impressive for such a small travel-friendly palette. So before we go to mini retro, I did want to also do some comparison swatches with you guys. So let's first just take a look at how mini nude looks next to some of my other palettes. So here is mini nude next to the Glam Face palette light. You can see that even though these are both neutral color stories, the Glam Face is definitely more pinky neutral, whereas mini nude is a bit more golden. When I saw mini nude in person, I thought immediately of the bronze palette. This is her midi size. And I would say these are a little bit more similar, though bronze is definitely a bit warmer. So just to give you guys some comparisons, let's put Beach over here. So Beach is, I think, kind of similar. Actually, yeah, pretty similar actually to this shade from Mini Nude. Maybe Beach is just a little bit more orangey, whereas this is more yellowy. And then let's see, looking at these, I feel like True Copper might look a little bit similar. Ooh, True Copper is so creamy. Okay, yeah, so that one is a little bit more reddish than this one over here. Let's try Silk. Oh, every shadow that I'm swatching in this bronze palette is so beautifully creamy. I've not pulled this palette out for a while, but would highly recommend this one as well. So, okay, there we go. So Silk, I think, is more similar in shade to this, though it's definitely a bit more sparkly. And then for good measure, let me just also go into True Bronze and add that to the party. I feel like this one kind of looks similar to some of the base pigment in this dual chrome, but this dual chrome is actually very unique. It's very different from any of these shades in the bronze palette. The bronze palette has this dual chrome, but it's not like a very flaky one. Okay, so that's looking quite nice. And then let's see, for the deeper shade, I'm just going to quickly swatch Magma. This is a little bit more reddish and less deep in comparison to this one. So in general, I would say that the Midi Bronze definitely can give you sort of a similar vibe to Mini Nude, but actually if you're deciding between the two of them, I would say that this one is better if you want to have like very creamy, kind of top of the line, glittery formulas, but actually Mini Nude I think is better if you just want a very complete look, because Midi Bronze doesn't actually have a good inner corner highlight and is a little bit more limited in terms of mattes as well. Like I end up always going into Deep Dive whenever I use this palette, but I do kind of wish there was more of that chocolatey brown shade similar to what we have in Mini Nude. So that's kind of surprising. I actually wasn't expecting that kind of outcome, but that's why I like doing these comparison swatches for you guys, because I also end up learning things in the process. So moving right along, let's put the Mini Retro palette on my right side. So this is a very unique color story, probably one of the most unique from Natasha Denona, in that you have these very contrasting tones of pink and green in one palette, but it still kind of works together as a really nice spring palette. So I'm going to swatch this on the back of my arm. So let's start with Galaxia. This is a Chroma Crystal shade. So it should be very high shine and sparkly. And I would say it actually looks mostly like her typical metallic, but definitely has a little bit extra glimmer in there. Not as shiny as some of her Chroma Crystals, like in her Metropolis palette, which I'll do some comparison swatches for gold with, but still really beautiful. And then next we have Industrial. This is a metallic. Ooh. Now that's a very creamy shade. Wow. Okay, so Galaxia maybe was a little bit more subdued than I was expecting, but wow. Oh my gosh, look at that. There's just so much shine to that Industrial shade. Next we have 60s. This is a creamy matte shade. I'm very attracted to this shade, and it reminds me of some shades in Midi Retro or Retro Glam. I have that palette as well, and we'll do some comparisons for you guys later. That palette is basically inspired by this palette, so I'm really curious to see how similar or different they are. And then we have this Vintage Taupe shade, also creamy matte. Oops. There's some fallout from the previous shade that got mixed in there, so please ignore the green streaks. But you can see that's a little bit more of a peachy nude. And then the final shade over here is Pixie. This is a metallic shade. Definitely more subdued than the other metallic shade. I mean, this one's technically metallic, but it's definitely the shiniest shade in this palette. On the whole, really, really pretty, very feminine but unique color story. So when I put this on my eyes yesterday, I was a little bit confused how to make these shades all kind of work together, because green and red are on opposite sides of the color wheel, and so that's something I also struggle with the Retro Glam palette. It's not really colors that easily blend together, because if you're not careful and you mix red and green together, you're just going to get brownish gray. So we'll see how this works. I'm going to start with this shade though, because this one is obviously the lighter of the two mattes. Yesterday, basically, I kind of put the greens on the outer half of my eyes and the pinks on the inner half, and the look was okay, but it did feel a little bit disjointed. So I'm going to see if today I can hopefully put together a prettier look. So that blended out like a dream. Wow. Okay, so that was super easy. Very nice. And now I think what I'm going to do actually, and this is like maybe a bad idea, we'll see, but I'm going to first just put the pinks on my lid so you guys can see what that looks like, and then I'm just going to layer on top the greens, and I don't know, we'll go from there. So let's first put on this shade, and I'm going to just put this kind of all over just so you guys can get a sense of the texture for this. So that's how that shade is looking. If you want like a really pretty kind of muted shade, I think this is quite nice. It's definitely more of a satin metallic. I wouldn't call this like a full-blown metallic compared to some of Natasha Denona's other formulas. So here we have those two shades. And now I'm going to go in with this really sparkly shade and put that on the kind of inner half of my eyes. So you can see Galaxia definitely has a much bigger punch in comparison to the Pixie shade. Like Pixie kind of just blends into the matte, whereas Galaxia kind of brings the shine to the party. So now let me put on Industrial. This one just feels totally different from the other shades. It feels very, very creamy, which I really like. And as you can see, it looks really, really gorgeous as well. Wow, okay. So I would definitely say that, at least upon initial impressions, this is the standout shade of this palette. Whew. Wow, look how much is still left on my finger from dipping in just once. You get so much payoff. Whew, man. And for the outer corner, I'm going in with my Sonia G worker brush into that deep green shade. And Gonna tap this on. I did get some fallout with this shade yesterday, so that's the one thing that I'm not a huge fan of. But the pigment payoff is really gorgeous with this. Whew. Look at that. So I feel like I'm kind of cheating a bit in that it was sort of like a purely pink look and now it's a purely green look. I like both of those, but it's not necessarily like, you know, giving you the full effect of the palette. That said, I do really love how this is looking. So, so pretty. Wow. Okay, let me try to bring back in some of that pink at least. So I'm going to go back into this shade and kind of further emphasize it along the crease area. I'm glad at least the shade is a little bit more peachy. I think that helps with the blend because if it was a bright pink, then it would just look really muddy when blended with the green. And then cleaning off that reference number 21, I'm going to take a little bit more of Galaxia. Just put that in the inner portion. Whew, very pretty as well. Maybe sweep a little bit of it to cover Industrial. Ooh. Okay, I'm actually really liking this look. Wow. It's really coming together. And then in terms of inner corner highlight for this look, I feel like Galaxia is kind of the main shade that can provide that. But because I put Galaxia over here, I'm going to actually put some of this Pixie shade in the inner corner. See how that looks. Okay, I think that also works as inner corner highlight. And now for the lower lash line, I'm going to go back in with that peachy matte. And I'm using my Sonia G Soft Definer brush to just sweep that all over. And then with the tip of this brush, I'm going into the green shade, focusing that on the outer portion of the eye. And then I wiped off my Sonia G Builder, so now I'm going to take some of that green shade, put it on the middle of the eye, and then some of Galaxia, put that in the inner portion. Whew, that is pretty. All right, so here we have the completed mini retro look, and here it is with eyeliner. So I'm actually quite pleased with this look. I like this a lot better than the look that I did yesterday. So I'm really glad that I tried sort of a different style today. I think it looks really nice with that kind of blur from kind of the peachy pink over into the green instead of like yesterday it was a little bit more just kind of half and half. So I actually really enjoy how both of these sides are looking and I'm kind of sad that I have to take it off. But before we do that, let's definitely do some comparison swatches between the Mini Retro and the Retro Glam palette. Moving you guys back a little bit for this portion. So let's see, they're actually quite different. Let's put them side by side for you guys. So in general, I would say the Mini Retro is a lot more warm toned and spring-like, whereas the Retro Glam is kind of cool toned, trying to kind of be Christmassy. So interesting. Like I think the biggest difference is that the Mini Retro has more of a peachy undertone to the pinks, whereas Retro Glam definitely has more like bright pink red. So to try to find some comparisons, let's see. So Flutter is kind of the comparison to Galaxia, but Flutter is just a straight up champagne shade. Then we have Holly, which is kind of like the equivalent to this shade, but you can see that Holly is much lighter as a matte. I'll also just swatch Belle so you guys can see that. I guess Belle is actually a little bit more similar to the matte in Mini Retro. And then in terms of the deeper shades, I guess Evergreen is maybe the most similar to this, but very, very different still. Let's also swatch Faye for a good measure. Faye is, yeah, a lot lighter. Yeah, actually not finding many good comparisons, surprisingly. And then let's go into Marlin as a comparison with that really bright shade. And yeah, this shade is deeper, so we can go into Oz as well. put that down. I guess it's more similar to Oz, but Oz is less sparkly. Yeah, on the whole, really not finding many comparisons. Let me just show you guys that close up so you can see Mini Retro up here, these 5 shades, and then all of these are from Retro Glam. So definitely very similar vibes. I think if you just kind of like mush these on your eyes, you might get kind of a similar color story. But in terms of direct comparisons, there's actually not that much. Like in terms of these two mattes, like they're kind of similar to this, but this one's a lot more peachy. In terms of these mattes, they're a lot lighter and just not quite the same as this matte over here. And then, yeah, these are just way less flaky and also not quite the same as this shade over here. And there's really nothing like Galaxia, like Flutter is kind of the most similar and really not. So actually, I would say, if you haven't picked up this palette and you want kind of this color story, I think actually this might be a better deal, because looking at my eyes right now, I think this is kind of very similar to the types of looks I go for when I try to use my Retro Glam palette. But I think the color story is a little bit more cohesive here just because that peachy undertone helps the red and the green mix. And also in terms of payoff, like swatching these next to the mini palette, I just find that like none of the metallics here are actually that creamy or chunky, whereas both Galaxia and Industrial are just way more shiny than any of the metallics here. It's kind of the opposite of what I experienced with the previous comparison. Like Bronze had a lot more of the super creamy high shine metallics in comparison to the Mini Nude, but with Retro Glam, I feel like Retro Glam is just a lot more subdued, surprisingly, from a texture perspective in comparison to Mini Retro. So, wow, that's actually quite eye-opening. I feel like most people bought Mini Retro first and then they got Retro Glam because of just, you know, the order that these palettes came out. And I actually really do like Retro Glam, but I don't know, like after doing this comparison, I feel like if I was redoing things and I got Mini Retro first, I don't know that I would actually like Retro Glam that much because it might be kind of disappointing as the extended version. And then the last comparison I'll just do for you guys is between Retro and Mini Retro. So here we have those two. You can tell they're completely different color stories. I think this is why people were really up in arms when the Midi Retro came out, because they really have absolutely no relationship whatsoever. Like even the peachy shades, like over here, I don't think there's much similarity at all. So that's quite interesting. I'm not really sure why she named this after this. If you guys are new to NATASHA DENONA, basically she came out with this palette, then she came out with this palette, and then she came out with the Retro Glam, and so these are all technically in the same family, but as you can tell, they are quite different. So as much as I really loved those eyeshadow looks, I went ahead and took those off, so now we can go into the Mini Gold palette. Before diving in though, I did want to mention that I switched up my lip color. So earlier I was wearing Negligée from Pat McGrath. This is a bit of a deeper, warm, peachy shade. And now I've switched that out for Venusian Peach. So this one is a little bit peachier, a little bit lighter. And I wanted to wear these two today because she just released more shades of her SatinAllure formula. And so I feel like a lot of people have been talking about them again. And so I wanted to wear them to just kind of refresh my memory in terms of how I feel about these formulas. In general, I think it's a really nice, very solid satin lipstick formula. Very hydrating, as you can see on the lips, does not emphasize lip lines at all. So really great from that perspective. Also, there's no fragrance or taste, so I really enjoy that. The packaging definitely is a little bit cheap, I would say, though, for Pat McGrath and for the price. So this is kind of a very solid medium lipstick, in my opinion. There's really nothing wrong with it, but it's just also not outstanding. But that tangent aside, let's go into Mini Gold. So this is actually the palette that led me to make this haul in the first place. I've been really interested in this kind of golden green color story, and I really wanted to pick this up for the longest time and was going to pick it up from Sephora, but then they've been sold out of this palette. And so I was super excited when this was on a 50% off sale on the Natasha Denona website. If it's still available, I would definitely recommend checking it out because I think she's having this big sale because she's planning on discontinuing some of these. And this guy's been on like 50% off in a lot of sites recently. So let's start with swatching. So this is Lodge. This is it says cream to powder, which is kind of surprising. The rest of them have been creamy mattes, but I don't feel like this actually is her cream to powder formula. I don't know, maybe it is? Okay. I retract my earlier statement that these minis do not include her cream to powder. This does say cream to powder. It feels more like her other matte formulas though. Let me just quickly feel this from the, yeah, it feels like the same as this. So I don't know. Very mysterious. Okay, I'm not sure if that's just a labeling mistake, but it doesn't really feel like her cream to powder formula, which is more like a cream. This just feels like her normal creamy matte. But in any case, going on, let's see. This one is Dark Sepia, really beautiful kind of satin metallic shade. This has the designation P on it. I don't really know what that means, actually. I don't think I've had a shade from her that's designated P. If you guys know, please let me know, because this is definitely not matte. It has shimmers in it. Maybe you can see some of that reflectivity in the finger swatch a bit more. But, yeah, this labeling on the back of this package is a bit confusing. So the next one is Door, and this one is metallic, though I think this one is more like kind of her chroma crystal or dual chrome. Like you can see there's actually some nice shift there. So I don't know what is happening with these labeling, but it's quite shiny, not just like her normal metallics. And then we have Bia. This one also says cream to powder, but again, kind of feels like her normal mattes. I'm not getting that much of that kind of moisture content, so that's interesting. But this shade is really, really beautiful. I can't wait to swatch this next to Lethal from Metropolis because that's one of my favorite shades from her. And then finally we have Anthea. This one is supposed to be a dual chrome. Interesting. Okay, yeah, I guess, yeah, this one does have some shift to it. It has more of a standard metallic finish, whereas I feel like Bia definitely has a higher shine finish. In general, though, I'm very confused with some of the labeling around this palette, so definitely let me know if you have any ideas there. I mean, everything's swatched beautifully, and I don't think there's any quality issues. So to start out with this look, I'm going to go in with my Rephr number 27 brush, which I cleaned off. And I'm going into that lighter shade. Hopefully my eye primer has had some time to set. It's always a little bit dicey when you use micellar water to remove makeup and then you go straight in with more primer. Sometimes there's like residual product left that can make things tricky. But so far I think this is blending in beautifully. So you can see the shade actually does have a tiny hint of kind of khaki green to it as well. Let me actually bring you guys a bit closer so hopefully you can see more clearly. I'm really bummed out that I didn't get the full-sized gold palette before that was discontinued because I've heard so many amazing things about that palette, and for many people it was like their favorite Natasha Denona palette of all time. So hopefully this mini gold helps to fill some of that gap. The reason I never picked up the bigger one is it kind of felt like there weren't a ton of different color options considering how expensive it was, like $130. So now with my classic crease from Sonia G, I'm going into this avocado green shade. And this was definitely for me the standout shade that really attracted me to this palette because I find that this is actually a kind of unique shade. I mean, it shouldn't be that unique, but I only have like one other shade in my collection that's quite like this. That's the Lethal shade I mentioned earlier. And even though greens I think are having a moment, it's kind of hard to find a really good warm green matte. Ooh, that's quite pretty. I really like how pigmented the shade is. It gives really good payoff. And now going into this deepest shade with my Wayne Gloss number 19, I'm gonna just put this kind of near the lash line. Like I said, this does definitely have some golden glimmer in it, but on the whole, it's not that sparkly, so I'm gonna use it as a deepening shade. Wow, that is really pretty though. I feel like when you get it on the lids, you can see some of that reflectivity from the gold. Really gorgeous, huh? And now I'm going into this really flaky shade, putting it on the inner, let's say, 1/2 to 2/3 of my eyes. Wow, look at that. That's really gorgeous. Oof. The shade is very similar to Industrial in the Mini Retro in terms of just being really, really high shine, flaky, very show-stopping. Whew, look at that. And then also with a finger, I'm going to go into this shade, which is super creamy as well, and just put this kind of on the boundary between the matte and high shine shade. Whew. Wow, this one's really pretty as well. I'm just going to go back into each of those previous shades just to further build things out in the outer corner, refine edges there. So now for the lower lash line, I'm going to first go in with my Wayne Gloss number 7 brush into the tan shade and kind of just replicate what I did on top, sweeping this generously all over the lower lash line. And then I'm going in with some of that green shade, concentrating this a little bit closer to the lash line. Then taking my builder brush, I'm going in with some of that really beautiful golden shade, putting that kind of on the inner 2/3. Then taking a little bit of the green shade just kind of on the center. And finally, just taking a tiny bit of the black shade and putting that on the outer portions. And here we have the final eyeshadow look. What do you guys think? And here we have the look with eyeliner. As always, I'll link in the description box everything that's on my face. So before we get into comparison swatches with Mini Gold, let me just finish up the rest of my face. So I already have some of this Elephant palette from Hourglass on, but I'm gonna just add a little bit of the bronzer for nose contour. I also have this as my bronzer all over my face today. I wanted something that was kind of warm and spring-like. On my cheeks at the moment, I have this blush and this highlight, but I feel like with this gold green look, I kind of want something a little bit warmer as well. So I'm gonna go in to my Hourglass Tiger palette and take a little bit of this shade because I really love this shade and want an excuse to use it. So with my Face Pro, which is what I used to apply my cheek products previously, I'm just going to add a little bit of that orangey shade, just kind of a hint to add a little bit more color to my cheeks. Look how beautiful that is. It just has a really gorgeous luminosity to it as well. Ooh, look at that. Super, super pretty. So now for some comparisons. Here is Mini Gold next to Metropolis. So overall, these are actually very different. They don't really look that similar, but I feel like the greens might have some slight similarities. So let's swatch and see. So first off, with that kind of khaki shade, I'm gonna go into this shade over here for comparison. So that is definitely more yellowy in comparison to this shade. And then for the deep shade, I'll go into this, so this shade is definitely in her cream to powder, and it feels very different from the supposed cream to powders here. So I don't know about the labeling, but yeah, this one definitely has more of a green grungy tone, not as deep as this shade over here. Let's go into Lethal, because this is the shade I really want to compare with this. And oh, interesting. Okay, so Lethal is actually a lot lighter and more yellowy in comparison to the green in Mini Gold. And then let's go into Orium over here. I really love this shade as well. Basically, whenever I open up this palette, I'm mostly drawing from these shades over here, which is why I thought of comparing it with this palette. Ooh. Okay, there's Orium. That's like my favorite shade in this palette. Definitely has some similarities to the dual chrome here, but this one is more gold, whereas this one's a little bit more bronzy, orangey. And then finally, let's go into Shield and just swatch this. Okay, yeah, that has some similarities actually to this shade over here. This shade has a little bit more of a gold-green flip to it, whereas this one's just straight up metallic, but a little bit of similarity. So here we have the close-ups. It's overall actually quite different. So here is Mini Gold and here is Metropolis. On the whole, Metropolis is a bit lighter, a little bit less glittery, and also more yellowy orange in comparison to Mini Gold, though I can definitely see some similarities as well. So on the whole, I'm really glad that I finally bit the bullet and picked up these three palettes, because I've been thinking about picking up these minis for the longest time, but it just didn't seem like, you know, the best thing to prioritize given that these are sort of old and I have so many other Natasha Denona shadows. But I've actually been quite surprised and impressed with each of these. So Mini Nude, for example, I think is just really holistic and really great in terms of everything you need to put together a very glam, everyday, kind of warm, neutral look. Basically, you have your light and your deep matte, you have your inner corner and brow bone highlight, you have two gorgeous shimmers. This one especially is just so creamy, and I was very, very impressed with that. Actually, while we have this open, why don't I use this as inner corner and brow bone highlight, since that is one thing that the Mini Gold and Mini Retro palettes are lacking in. Ooh, look at that. So creamy and easy to use. I would say if you have the Midi Bronze palette, you can definitely get a very similar look to what you can get here. But if you don't have that palette, this is actually a pretty good alternative to give you a really similar look in just one small package for a lower price. Mini Retro was also really impressive, and this one was probably the biggest surprise of today in terms of comparing this with the Retro Glam palette, because I thought that once I picked up that palette, I really would have no need at all for this palette. But I actually found that I liked this palette in certain ways better than Retro Glam. So if you are on the fence between those two, I would definitely say that this one has a little bit more of a cohesive color story because of that peachy undertone. And also these two shimmers are just so buttery and high shine, so much more so than any of the shimmers in the Retro Glam. So I'm actually really glad that I picked this up now, since I feel like this is actually a better curation. And then finally, Mini Gold, I really love as well. I feel like if you're into those green colors, but you don't want to buy like a big palette to achieve it, this is basically all the shades you need to have a warm toned gold green look. The quality is really impeccable, and even though these are called cream to powder formulas, if you're not a fan of that formula from Natasha Denona, don't let that put you off from these, because I feel like this feels more like her creamy matte, maybe kind of somewhere in between the two. I just assumed they were creamy mattes based on my experience yesterday, but they perform really impeccably, leave really nice pigmentation, and this gold shade is definitely a showstopper. So that's it for today's video. I would love to hear in the comments what you guys think about Natasha Denona's mini palettes. I've heard very mixed things about some of her other mini palettes, so definitely let me know what your thoughts are on those. Should I pick up and try any of them? And if you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!